Hey y'all, this is episode number 18. We're going to be talking about flag burning and freedom of speech. So a very important topic being discussed today. Like I said on the last episode, I recently appeared on the Freedom in Tech podcast. You can find the links to that on sovereignpod.com under media appearances. It's also on all of my social media. So at sovereignpod on Instagram, at sovereignpod on Twitter, same handle. You can find the links there, and it's posted on Facebook as well. So would appreciate y'all going and checking that out as well. It's a really cool group. They're doing some awesome stuff and trying to find a solution to, what's going on in tech with all the silencing of voices and all that kind of stuff. So really cool group. I like what they're doing, and it was a really fun podcast. So it's also got video if you want to look at my ugly mug while you're listening. And thanks once again to Flavor Aid for the intro music you're about to hear. Please check out their new EP, All My Life. It's so good. I can't stress this enough. I love it. Midnight. This song just gets me. I love it. I've listened to it so many times. It's just great. That beat is just something else. So great job, guys. And I hope y'all take a chance to listen to that EP, take a chance to listen to that Freedom in Tech podcast, and enjoy this episode. What's up, y'all? This is the Sovereign Individual Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Guerra. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. If you're liking what you're hearing so far, please subscribe, rate, and review the show, and share it with anyone you think might enjoy listening to these topics and listening to this whole liberty thing that we got going on here. So, working on growth, and we're going to see where we can go with this. But like I've said before, it's very cathartic for me, so if it doesn't end up growing or anything like that, that's fine. It helps me a lot, so I'm going to enjoy it, and hopefully you're enjoying it and learning something too along the way about what all these crazy liberty folks are always yammering on about. And one of the things that we're always yammering on about is the freedom of speech, which is going to be the topic of discussion today. So like I said on the last episode, I didn't really know what I was going to be talking about on this one, and sometimes the universe provides. And it provided yesterday in the form of a Candace Owens tweet that we're going to be talking about here on the show. So, we'll get into that. There's two tweets in particular that we're going to want to talk about, but we'll start with the one that kicked off everything. And Candace Owens is a conservative commentator, an interesting personality, I would say, is probably the best way to describe her. The nicest way to describe her. There's a lot that she says that I can agree with, or at least a lot of positions that she holds that I can understand the basis of them if I don't necessarily agree with them. You can at least understand where she's coming from and why she's making that argument. And then there's plenty that I can't agree with and that I don't understand, and so this is going to fall into that category. But let's look at this tweet real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and read it off. She said, or tweeted rather, and I quote, "If I were president, the punishment for burning the U.S. flag would be the renunciation of citizenship. No jail time, no fine, simply 1 year to liquidate your assets and get the hell out of our country. In exchange, we'd extend citizenship to a hardworking, legal immigrant." End quote. So the legal was, every letter of that word was capitalized, a very Trump-esque way of tweeting. Where to even begin? Should I go to the... First and foremost, before we jump into the second tweet, we'll just start here. Flag burning is a protected form of speech, and as long as it's your flag that you're burning, you can do whatever the hell you please with it. You can piss on it. You can wipe your ass with it. You can stamp all over it. You can use it as a napkin. You can use it as a towel. You can hang it up in a very special area of your house. and protect it. You can frame it. You can fly it on your own flagpole that you built in your yard every single day, and you can absolutely 100% burn it. That's this beautiful thing called the First Amendment and freedom of speech that we love so dearly in this country. Or at least some people do. Apparently Candace Owens does not. And I've seen a few different arguments about this. And I saw another, I think it was Lauren Chen, who's another younger female conservative commentator. She was saying something along the lines of, if you're burning a flag, you're disrespecting everyone who's ever served that flag, everyone who holds that flag dear, everybody, I don't know, some typical, it's funny because it's more of like a boomer sentiment than one. I think Lauren Chen is like the young millennial. I think that's her shtick, or the roaming millennial, something millennial. And so it's funny to get like a boomer-esque take out of her. This whole like, you're burning the flag, you're burning on the memory of everybody. Okay, what exactly do those memories include, though? Like, are we talking about the fact that slavery was a legal institution within the United States? Are we talking about the fact that we've now engaged in wars based on lies for decades? Are we talking about the tens of thousands of lives that were lost in Vietnam? Are we talking about the tens of thousands of lives that have been lost in Afghanistan? Are we talking about the millions of people that have died in Iraq? Are we talking about the, maybe not even war, are we talking about the 500,000 children that died in Iraq as a direct result of our sanctions? Are we talking about the open-air slave trade in Libya as a result of the U.S. government's involvement in there? All of those things are part of what that flag represents. A ton of innocent people have been killed as a result of that flag. So what are you even talking about? You don't get to cherry pick the good stuff. You don't get to just pretend as if America has this beautiful, perfect history without flaw, and that's the only thing that the flag represents is the good that America has done. It represents all of it. And on the global scale, when it comes to foreign policy, most of it is absolutely abhorrent and disgusting. So it's no wonder that around the world, the American flag tends to not be a symbol of freedom and the symbol of a just nation seeking to bring good to the world. For a lot of people, it means death. It means destruction. It means their loved ones dying because there was a single person at that wedding that the United States wanted to take out, so they killed everybody in the wedding with a drone strike. That's what that flag represents to a lot of people around the world. So again, you don't get to just cherry pick what you want when it comes to that and what it represents. It represents everything. And that's why the act of burning it is a protected form of speech and a type of protest. You're saying, I am not in agreement with what is being done in the name of this flag, and therefore I'm going to burn it in protest. So, maybe she wanted to clarify what she was saying. Miss Totalitarian, authoritative president, if she were. This also made me think for a second that you would renounce the citizenship. So if I were to burn a U.S. flag under President Candace Owens, would that mean I get to not pay taxes then if she takes away my citizenship? Because I'll go burn a flag right now if it means I don't pay taxes. Obviously, that's a joke. Probably not even a very good one. I don't know. Kind of tired today. I didn't get great sleep last night, but I don't know. Just kind of struck me that maybe that would be a good workaround for the tax situation. But yeah, so then somebody replied to her Actually, who is this? Because he's got a blue check mark. Not that that means much of anything, because just about any idiot can get a blue check mark. This guy, Renato Mariotti, he's a former goodness gracious. Come on, Eric. Former federal prosecutor. There we go. Try to say that 5 times fast, I guess. Yeah, you could probably do it, because I don't know why I'm messing up right now. He's a CNN legal analyst, hosts a podcast, columnist for Politico. Anyway, so he responded to this tweet of Candace's. Said that would violate the United States Constitution, so it's a good thing you're not president. So let's see what Miss Candace says. Is she going to clarify, or is she going to double down? And she said, and I quote, 1A, meaning First Amendment, but she just put 1A. So 1A has limitations. You can't yell fire in a movie theater without consequence. You cannot yell racial epithets at someone without consequence. And if I were president, you sure as hell wouldn't burn a flag without consequence. End quote. Goodness. So, there's going to be a lot to dive into, and that we're going to get to kind of about what she just said. She's doing that thing where you equate government punishment with consequences. It's just like weird. I don't know why that tends to happen. It especially tends to happen with freedom of speech and weird it's used as a slight against freedom of speech absolutists a lot of the time, where like if you're critical of something or what somebody's saying, they'll be like, oh, but freedom of speech, they could say whatever they want. And I'm not calling for anything to happen to them. I'm critiquing what they're saying and why it's wrong. That's part of why this freedom of speech thing is so important, so that you can openly challenge bad ideas and show why they're bad ideas. When you push them underground and into hiding, they don't get challenged openly. That's why it's so dangerous what's occurring on social media right now. That's not me calling for government intervention. That's just me saying if you're pushing these groups underground, deplatforming them, demonetizing them, then they face no challenge to their beliefs. They get with their little friends in their little blogospheres or their forums, and then they just spout this nonsense without any sort of challenge to it. But the thing is, too, is it's like, especially from a libertarian standpoint and a, absolutist standpoint on freedom of speech, it's not freedom from consequence. In fact, we like the consequences that are born out of a free market. And that, somebody can hold awful viewpoints and they can suffer consequences of the market as a result of that. People won't patron their business anymore. And then they go out of business. And I am fine with that. Like, that's what happens when you hold awful, abhorrent views. But I'm not calling for the government to get involved. I'm not trying to use the violence of the state in order to force this person to believe how I want them to believe. It's vastly different things that we're talking about here. And that's the scary part about Candace saying something like this. Is she's absolutely saying she will use the violence of the state to enforce this idea that she has, that you aren't allowed to burn the flag. So it's not just bad enough that you might burn a flag and she disagrees with it and she doesn't think that's the right thing to do, and she would never want to do that herself or participate or view that happening. That's not enough. No, she needs to control you to the point that she will use violence to do so. That's where this gets scary, and that's what's awful about something like this. And not surprising that it is coming out of a conservative like this, especially when it comes to flag burning. I mean, there's a time in my life where I would have agreed with this tweet. When I was like 16, 17, 18 years old, yeah, I thought there was nothing worse than burning an American flag. I was like that Lauren Chen, where it was like, you're disrespecting everybody who loves this flag, everybody who's fought for this flag, all that nonsense. I was 100% like that. So don't get me wrong, I get where it's coming from in that regard, but you're 100% wrong. And what's scary about it is that we're now seeing this type of language coming out of folks on the right. Because for a long time, it's been mostly from the fringes of the left, like the far fringes of the left, where this like thought policing has been coming from, and this idea that we need to police people's thoughts and they're not allowed to believe a certain way. It's not enough to try to be upset with what you think. You need to try to use violence in order to change it. And it was predominantly coming out of the fringes of the far left, and it was scary because it's not being challenged enough by normal folks on the left in a lot of ways when it comes to different things. Like in the social justice realm, this whole idea of there's science doesn't matter. It's funny that the party of science, as they like to claim to be, or at least parts of the left claim to be, there's also parts of the left that completely ignore science when it comes to like differences in gender. And so, but that's where it gets scary with this kind of thing, with the First Amendment, like hate speech. Hate speech is protected under the First Amendment. Hate to break it to you. There's a lot of people out there that seem to be confused about that. And be like, well, hate speech, that's not protected. Yeah, it is. It is absolutely protected. And it needs to be, and it should be. Because again, like I was saying, you have to challenge these ideas out in the open. If you push these ideas underground into the darkness, they just fester and grow. They're not able to be challenged. And so those folks, and then you add legitimacy to it. You're saying that these ideas are so dangerous that they can't be heard. What you're implying then is that these ideas will grow because there's validity to them. Instead, what will happen is if you let these people talk and spit their idiot ideology, they can be challenged and shown to be how dumb they are. There's a famous black gentleman who collects the robes of all the KKK members that he's turned, and he's got like a bunch of them. I think I've talked about it on a podcast before. But the other thing too, especially when you're talking about something like hate speech, because it seems to be a trigger right now of like, yeah, well, hate speech shouldn't be protected. Like that's freedom of speech, but not hate speech. Well, who's going to determine that? Who's going to determine what hate speech is? The government? Sure, you know how I would feel about that. The scary thing about it, too, is that government's not going to remain the same. Whatever power you're giving it, you have to imagine that the opposite person, the person you think is evil, you think their views are awful and abhorrent, you have to imagine them having that power. I mean, think about it just from like what I was saying with those fringe groups, fringe people on the left. There is a legitimate group of people that make the argument that misgendering someone is violence. Not just rude, not just an asshole thing to do, but it's violence. You're telling me those people wouldn't then use the violence of the state to lock people in cages for misgendering someone? Or even kill them? So who's going to decide what hate speech is? We're going to have hate speech panels that determine this type of thing? No. It's protected. Let it into the open. Challenge it. Show why it's wrong. That's how you defeat this type of language. That's how you defeat this type of thinking. You don't use thought police. You show why it's wrong. And you strike it down with good ideas. All right, Eric. Well, if hate speech is protected, surely at least the thing Candace said about yelling fire in a movie theater, I mean, that's right. I don't care if you yell fire in a movie theater. You can yell whatever you damn please in the movie theater as far as I'm concerned, and the state should have no involvement in it. Who does have a involvement in it and has every right to throw you out and ban you from coming again if you yell fire in a movie and there's no fire and you're doing it for attention or doing it to be funny or whatever, is the owners of the movie theater. You know, there's a movie theater chain that started here in Austin called the Alamo Drafthouse. It's spread out a lot, actually, now. There's a bunch. There was one in Kansas City that I saw when I went and visited there. And then when I was in San Francisco for the holidays visiting family, there's a new one there. My girlfriend and I went with my sister and her boyfriend, and it was awesome. Actually, it was really cool. If you're in the Austin area and if you're an Austinite and you know the Alamo and you find yourself in San Francisco, I would go check it out. It's a really cool venue, really cool. But so anyway, the Alamo Drafthouse, it's a really cool concept. You have a server that waits on you during the movie. You can order like food and beer and wine and liquor, and you order by writing your order on a little card that you put in a stand, and then they'll come run by and they'll grab the card and then they'll put your order in. There's another thing about the Alamo Drafthouse. Like, I can't watch movies anywhere else anymore. I won't go to any other theaters, and the main reason is this. They kick you out if you talk or text during the movie. No refund. They just kick you out. And if you're having a problem with somebody talking or texting, what you do is you write it on an order card and you put it in the thing. And that's how the self-policing goes with the moviegoers. But I've never actually ever seen somebody kicked out, personally. In any of the movies that I've gone to, and I've been going to Alamo for years now at this point. So, is that a infringement on your First Amendment rights? No. It's a rule that the theater holds, and if you're going to patron that theater, you're going to pay them, but you're going to get to experience the movie. You have to follow that rule. Otherwise, you don't get to watch that movie. It's funny how that works. This whole property rights thing is actually the solution to most of the issues that you have, that a lot of people tend to have when they talk about, free speech, but. There's always that but. You know, these exceptions to the First Amendment. Well, this kind of speech shouldn't count. Another one that gets thrown around is child pornography. I don't know how that would fall in the purview of freedom of speech. You're aggressing upon a child. You're sexually assaulting a child. That's not, I don't get where that falls into the idea of freedom of speech. Pornography, I can see, but this is an assault. So I don't get that argument either. People use that as gotcha, you're not a freedom of speech absolutist because you think child pornography is bad. Of course I do. It's a violation of the non-aggression principle. It's not freedom of speech, you dunce. Anyway, sorry if you believe that child porn falls under the purview of freedom of speech. I didn't mean to call you a dunce. I just don't get that at all. And that's a horrible argument, in my opinion, against freedom of speech absolutist. But the idea of property rights solves most of the problems when it comes to freedom of speech. The other one, Here's the other one: inciting violence. Well, Eric, you can't have people. You can't have people inciting violence. That's speech that needs to be limited. You can't have people out there inciting violence. Oh, I'm sorry. People have no agency. People have no agency in their decision making. They're told that they should commit violence, so they're just going to commit violence. See, this was the argument that was trying to be made during the Charles Manson trial, is that the girls were so under Charlie's control that they would do anything for him. And therefore, they weren't truly guilty of committing these murders because he told them to do it. Now, what was really interesting about this is that, and it's a fascinating read. If you ever read Helter, I highly recommend reading Helter Skelter. It's written by Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor from the case, and just talks about the entirety of the case, how it came together, how they were building it, how he built his case against the Manson family. And it's really interesting to see because he was grappling with this during the trial. He's like, I need to prove the control that Manson had over these folks because I want him charged. He is just as guilty, even if he didn't actually commit any of these specific murders. Charlie had murdered people before, but he hadn't committed these specific ones. In those nights in August of 1969, the Tate murders and then the LaBianca murders. But he's like, I need to prove that they did this because Charlie ordered them to. However, he's also like, these are still adults with free will. And Linda Kasabian, who ended up being the star witness, who was there and saw everything but didn't participate in the murders, was kind of his proof that, like, Charlie told these people to do that, and that's the reason why they did it, but they still did it. So that's what we're talking about when you're talking about inciting violence. Look, I don't care how it happened or why it happened. You committed violence. And we can deal with the person that is quote unquote inciting it or what they may have done. It's a very rare case where it's going to be somebody like Charles Manson in a situation like that where he's organizing orgies and he's having them all take acid trips together and influencing them mentally that way. That's a very rare occasion. You know, when we're talking about inciting violence, it's more of like in a protest or a riot situation where this is occurring. But still, you're talking about it as if people have no agency. If you commit violence, you commit violence. I don't care what the reasoning is. If it is not in self-defense, you are aggressing upon another individual. I do not care what the reason is. We can deal with it's insane to me that it's like this, as if these people have no choice in the matter and they're just pawns. They're like, oh, we got told to commit violence, so we're just going to commit violence. That's how it goes. It's just insane, like nuts to me. But so this is where property rights come in and how you solve this problem. No, you can't hold that rally on my property. I don't give you permission to. You don't get to do that. So it's like whenever crazy people like me who want to rid the world of government talk about this, that's the kind of thing that we can see where it's all private property. And therefore, these types of things wouldn't be able to just occur anywhere because you would have to have the permission of the property owner to do it. And the property owner has the right to remove anybody from his property or her property for whatever reason. No, I don't agree with what you're saying. I don't want you saying it on my property. Get off. There's a solution. That's what it comes down to, especially with something like this and like flag burning. Is it your piece of property that you're burning? Is it your flag? Cool. Is it on your property or somewhere where it is allowed to happen, where the owner of that property has given you permission to do so? Cool. If not, then it doesn't happen. So, Candace, you could absolutely kick anybody off of your property that was burning a flag. Have at it. But what you can't do, and what should never be talked about, is using the violence of the state in order to enforce your ideology and force somebody else to not say stuff you don't like, or to not do things in protest that you don't like. Talking about using the violence of the state. It's like the Westboro Baptist Church thing. That one comes up a lot too. Like, well, surely, I mean, what they say is awful. Yeah, it is. I hate them. I hate the Westboro Baptist Church, and I hate what they represent, but I will fight to the death for their right to be able to say that stuff. Again, it comes down to property. Like, think about it. Like, when they go and they protest at, like, a funeral for a fallen soldier or something like that, kick them off of the property. But again, we'd have these. I'm getting deep into the anarchist side of me right now, so I apologize for anybody. But when you're talking about public property, you get into these situations where they have a space that they can gather on that isn't technically private property, that they technically can't be kicked off of, and they're within, they're close enough to the funeral to be able to cause a problem. Which is nice when you see, like, it's happened a lot, and I think it tends to happen. I think the Westboro Baptist Church is tending to protest a lot less more. I think their numbers have probably dwindled. I think their congregation is smaller, but then people started, like, forming circles around them, basically, to, like, block out their protests from the funeral and stuff that was going on, and that's a great way to combat this type of speech, too. You're not using the violence of the state. You're just organizing peacefully and just surrounding them so that their hatred can't be spewed at the people, during the funeral. And again, kind of like I was saying, if it was all private property, then you would have the funeral on private property, and the owners of the property where the funeral is occurring could kick them off, tell them to get out of here. But why is this so important? This is inherent. The freedom of speech is vital. This is not you talk about the Constitution and the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, and it's a very beautifully written document in a lot of ways. It's probably the best document governing a state body in existence. But again, I mean, it's that's not saying a whole lot. This whole show is about critiquing the state and showing how awful it is, and showing the violence of the state, and why and it's so awful, and how bad it can truly be, and tends to lean towards. It tends to be on the bad side in everything it does, even if that's not necessarily violent, even if it's just inept or corrupt or just bad at what it does. But the Constitution, like the Bill of Rights, that's not what gives you those rights. That piece of paper didn't give you anything. That's what the point of that paper is. These are your rights by birth, given to you by a higher power, or given to you by strictly being a human and being born a human. However you want to look at it, whether you're looking at it spiritually or from a natural rights standpoint, these are your rights that you're born with by way of being human. And these rights are so important. These are just some of the rights, but these rights are so important that we're going to write it down in the Constitution, because the government that we're creating is not allowed to infringe on any of these rights. Now, unfortunately, that hasn't really happened. They've started infringing on all of those rights more and more and more as the years have gone on, which is why someone like me, who started his journey into liberty as a minarchist is how it's known. Minimal government. Constitutionalist is another form of it, although then that gets kind of mixed up with the Constitution Party, and they've got some weird views that are definitely not libertarian, so that's not even the best descriptor ever either. But somebody like me who started out as being like, we just need to get the government back to what the Constitution says, and then we'll be all right. But we have the Constitution, and we've seen how it's been abused and how the government has overstepped it and is doing things well outside of the purview of what it was deemed to be able to do by the Constitution. So somebody like me is just like, well, how can I think that it's going to be any different if we've tried this experiment and the experiment has failed in the fact that the government is now the largest government ever and is invading our lives and trampling on different rights more and more? How can I think that it would be any different? And so you have a situation right now like Hong Kong and the protests that are going on there over these proposed extradition laws. People kind of pushing back against Chinese authoritarianism. Over 1 million people protested over the weekend. I saw something, so Hong Kong has a population of 7.4 million. I saw somebody tweeted out that 25% of the population participated in these protests. So that'd be about, 1.85 million, give or take, somewhere around there. I don't know if it was quite that high, but there's been a lot of reports of it being well over 1 million, so it's very conceivable. And what was crazy too is I saw these pictures online. There's these machines at the train station that you can purchase, or there's self-purchasing machines you purchase your ticket for, and normally those lines are empty or close to it, and they were all packed because people were using cash to buy their train tickets so that it wouldn't be known that they were participating in the protest. Because if they were to use their card, then it would be able to be tracked by the Chinese government. Which that's a whole other thing that we'll get into on further episodes about this war on cash and why cryptocurrencies and other forms of currencies and cash itself are so important for your privacy of finances. And exactly because of situations like that. But that's the reason. That's why this is so important. That's why it's such a scary thing to see people start trying to make exceptions or try to determine that, this type of speech shouldn't be allowed, and it's so bad that we should allow the state to use violence to keep it from being spoken. We need to use the thought police in order to just make sure not only do people not speak this, but they're not allowed to think it. And if they do think it, we're just going to deperson them. It's a scary road that you're heading down. And it should scare the elite. Look at Hong Kong. Over 1 million people protested. You can't tell me that didn't scare the elite. And it should scare the elite. There's a great line in V for Vendetta that people should not be afraid of their government. The government should be afraid of its people. That is absolutely true. Absolutely 100% true. So a situation like this, that's the power of free speech. That's the power of protest. And that's the power of people rising up against the state. To say this is not going to fly. This will not be allowed. If you do this, you are going to face us. Nixon during the Vietnam War protests, there's I don't remember the specific date, but he had the DC buses lined up around the White House, and he was scared that they were going to come attack the White House. They were coming for them. He's legitimately scared, and he should be. Sending our folks to die, conscripting these young men into the armed forces and forcing them to go fight this war for no damn reason, in which there was a high likelihood that they themselves were going to die because we were ill prepared for the type of warfare we were fighting. And not only that, they're going there and they're killing a bunch of innocent people while we're doing it. We're napalming indiscriminately. You got the all right, I'm going to go off on a tangent. Too bad if I get into this, but that's the point. Is that the government should be scared of its people. And when we start talking about things like this, when we start talking about exceptions to the First Amendment, or freedom of speech except, or but this isn't. The government is going to take every freedom and every liberty that we give to it in the name of safety and security. And it's going to take that, and it's going to then abuse that power that we have given it by relinquishing those freedoms and those rights. And we are going to have to fight to get it back. They will not give that back to us willingly. So think about that. Anytime you are calling for rights or freedoms or liberties to be taken away from the people and given to the government in the name of protection, just remember that. You're not getting it back without a fight. So be very, very vigilant about any power you're willing to give the government, and be very, very vigilant about any rights you're willing to give up in the name of safety. Because at the end of the day, the government is not beholden to keep us safe. The Supreme Court has ruled that. The police have no obligation to keep you safe. The state does not care about you. You are a paycheck to them. They care that you pay your taxes. They care that you don't question them. They care that you just act like a sheep. And that you don't stir up anything and you don't cause problems. Like I've said it before, the biggest enemy to the state is the individual. Because the individual questions. The individual thinks. The individual can't be swayed by propaganda and by lies that the state tells them in order to try to get them to agree with what it's doing. That's why this is so important. That's why the freedom of speech is so important, and why it's so dangerous to see this rhetoric coming from both sides of the aisle. Again, mostly by fringes on both sides of the aisle, but that's where this kind of stuff starts. And it's scary. It's real scary, especially for someone like me with a podcast like this. I mean, it's not a huge podcast or anything, but who do you think gets thrown in the gulag when the state gets super powerful? People like me. The people that question the government, and critique it at every turn and call it out on its crap. Call it out when it's lying. So, that'll do it for today. That went a little bit longer than I intended, but these are the types of things that I like to talk about. These freedoms, they're so important. They're so, so important. And I just hope that you think about that whenever situations like this are arising. So, next episode, don't know what it's going to be about either. I'm sure the universe is going to provide something. And when am I going to record it? I don't know yet. Probably Thursday night would be my guess. But we shall see. So thanks again for listening, y'all. Really appreciate it. Y'all are awesome. And yeah, I'll see you later in the week. You are a sovereign individual, and I would die to protect your right to say anything and everything you want to say. Thanks, y'all.